Emotional rescue hunter saves dog tied to a tree, a story that will leave you speechless. What happens in the middle completely changes the ending. We'd love to know what city you're watching this video from. Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with all our content. Elliot Reed was no stranger to the cold isolation of life in the woods. A former therapist turned emotional rescue hunter, he specialized in finding and saving animals abandoned by those who couldn't love them anymore. It wasn't just his job, it was his way of healing after losing his wife and daughter in a tragic car accident 5 years earlier. On an early spring morning, Elliot received an anonymous call about a dog tied to a tree on the outskirts of Hidden Pines, a secluded forest an hour outside town. The caller's voice trembled as they gave directions but hung up before Elliot could ask for details. It wasn't unusual, he often dealt with people too ashamed or frightened to stay on the line. The forest was unusually quiet when Elliot arrived. Birds perched silently on bare branches, and a cold breeze rustled the undergrowth. Following the directions, he found a large German shepherd tied to a tree with a frayed rope. The dog looked emaciated, its ribs pressing against its matted fur. But its eyes, those deep, amber eyes, were full of something Elliot hadn't seen in a while: hope. "Hey there, buddy," Elliot said, kneeling cautiously. The dog didn't growl or flinch. Instead, it wagged its tail weakly, letting out a soft whimper. As Elliot untied the rope, he noticed something odd. A small, weathered tag hung around the dog's neck, inscribed with just one word: forgive. Confused but undeterred, Elliot took the dog, whom he decided to name Shadow, back to his cabin. Little did he know, Shadow wasn't just another rescue. The dog carried secrets that would unravel a mystery far beyond anything Elliot could have imagined. The day Shadow arrived, Elliot felt a shift in the atmosphere of his cabin. The space, once heavy with the weight of solitude, seemed lighter, as if the dog had brought a silent companionship that eased the ache in Elliot's chest. He prepared a bowl of chicken and rice for Shadow, noting how the dog ate methodically, not with the desperation he had expected from an abandoned animal. After dinner, Elliot sat by the fire, a worn journal in his lap. He had a habit of jotting down details about each rescue, a way to organize his thoughts and reflect on the work. He scribbled a few lines about Shadow, large German shepherd. Male. Approximate, 4 years old. Healthy despite signs of neglect. Amber eyes, unusually expressive. Tag reads, forgive. Possible backstory. Shadow lay at his feet, his gaze never leaving Elliot. There was something almost unsettling about the way the dog watched him, not with fear or confusion, but with a sense of understanding, as if Shadow knew something Elliot didn't. Later that night, Elliot was jolted awake by a low growl. He sat up in bed, his heart racing. Shadow stood at the front door, ears perked and body tense. "What is it, boy?" Elliot whispered, reaching for the flashlight on his nightstand. Shadow barked once, sharp and commanding. Elliot hesitated, then approached the door. The forest beyond was pitch black, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the wind. When he opened the door, there was no one there, no intruder, no animal. Except for a single piece of paper, pinned to the doorframe with a rusty nail. Elliot's breath caught as he carefully removed the note, unfolding it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was jagged and uneven, as if written in haste. "You took him. That's good. But be careful. He's more than just a dog." The words sent a chill down Elliot's spine. He stepped outside, shining his flashlight into the surrounding woods, but saw nothing. The forest was eerily silent, as though holding its breath. Shadow stood beside him, growling softly, his fur bristling. Elliot knelt beside the dog, placing a reassuring hand on his back. "It's okay, buddy. "We're safe," he said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. The rest of the night was restless. Elliot sat by the fire, the note clenched in his hand. Who had left it? How did they know about Shadow? And what did they mean by more than just a dog? The next day, Elliot tried to shake the unease. He focused on Shadow, taking him for a long walk through the woods. The dog seemed at home among the trees, leading Elliot confidently along the trails. But then Shadow stopped abruptly, his ears twitching. They were near a small creek that Elliot often visited, but Shadow refused to cross it. Instead, he whimpered and backed away, his amber eyes locked on something in the distance. Elliot followed his gaze but saw nothing unusual, just the dense forest and the faint outline of the mountains beyond. Still, Shadow's reaction unsettled him. That evening, as Elliot removed Shadow's collar to inspect the tag again, he noticed faint scratches on its surface. At first, he thought they were accidental, but as he cleaned the tag with a cloth, the scratches formed something deliberate: coordinates. Elliot froze. The realization hit him like a thunderclap. Someone had deliberately placed these coordinates on Shadow's tag, knowing they would be found. He retrieved his map and GPS device, marking the location. It pointed to a remote part of Hidden Pines, far from any trail or path. "What's out there?" Elliot murmured, glancing at Shadow. The dog wagged his tail faintly, his eyes unwavering. Elliot felt a familiar mixture of fear and determination rising within him. Whatever the message, whatever Shadow's past, he had to find out. The coordinates led Elliot and Shadow deep into Hidden Pines, where the forest grew denser and the paths faded into overgrowth. Shadow seemed to recognize the way, guiding Elliot through treacherous terrain as if he'd walked it before. After hours of hiking, they stumbled upon a clearing that looked untouched by time. In the center stood a dilapidated cabin, its windows shattered and door ajar. The sight sent chills down Elliot's spine. He'd heard local legends about this part of the forest, rumors of disappearances and unexplainable events. Shadow barked softly, his nose pointed toward the cabin. Elliot hesitated but decided to follow. Inside, the air was stale, filled with the scent of decay. The walls were covered in old photographs, yellowed with age. One of them caught Elliot's attention, a picture of a family, a man, a woman, and a young boy holding a German shepherd that looked strikingly like Shadow. Elliot's heart raced as he noticed a note taped to the back of the photo. It read, "If you found this, it means he's with you. Please, keep him safe. The truth lies buried here." As he processed the cryptic message, Shadow began pawing at a section of the floor. Elliot knelt beside him and noticed loose wooden planks. With some effort, he pried them open, revealing a small, locked metal box. Elliot stared at the small, weathered box he had unearthed from beneath the floorboards of the abandoned cabin. Its metal surface was rusted, the lock corroded with age, as if time had desperately tried to keep its contents hidden. Shadow sat nearby, his head tilted, amber eyes watching Elliot intently, almost as if urging him to open it. Back in his cabin, Elliot placed the box on the dining table, its weight heavier than expected for its size. He retrieved a set of small tools from his workbench, the kind he used for delicate tasks like removing embedded wires from abused animals he rescued. The lock resisted his efforts, groaning with protest as Elliot worked methodically. Finally, after nearly an hour, the lock gave way with a soft click. Elliot paused, hands trembling. Whatever was inside felt deeply personal, as if it carried the burden of someone's final words. Slowly, he lifted the lid. Inside, a stack of yellowed papers sat neatly tied with twine. Beneath it, a folded birth certificate rested atop a newspaper clipping, and at the very bottom, a small, hand-carved wooden figurine of a boy holding a dog. Elliot picked up the papers first, carefully untying the twine. The letters were written in uneven handwriting, the ink smudged in places where tears had undoubtedly fallen. To whoever finds this, the first letter began. I don't know if I'll survive long enough to tell my son the truth. If you're reading this, it means Shadow has led you here. Please, take care of my boy. His name is Samuel. The letter went on to describe Maria's life in brief, painful snippets: escaping an abusive relationship, hiding in the forest with Samuel and their dog, the original Shadow, her growing paranoia as she felt someone hunting them, watching their every move. Maria's tone was one of both desperation and fierce determination to protect her son. Elliot set the letters aside and unfolded the birth certificate. It confirmed Samuel's existence: name, Samuel James Anders, date of birth, August 14, 2010, father, unknown. The father's absence struck Elliot as significant, given Maria's fear. Who was he, and what had he done to drive her into hiding? Finally, Elliot unfolded the newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local woman and child missing in Hidden Pines, foul play suspected." The article, dated 15 years earlier, described Maria as a devoted mother who had vanished without a trace. Authorities suspected domestic violence but lacked evidence to pursue charges against her estranged husband. Her son, Samuel, had been presumed dead. The figurine at the bottom of the box felt warm in Elliot's hand, as if it carried the residual love Maria had poured into carving it. The craftsmanship was simple but detailed enough to show the boy's wide smile and the dog's loyal gaze. Elliot leaned back, overwhelmed. The story in the box painted a picture of sacrifice, fear, and love, but it also posed a question: if Samuel had been presumed dead, was that truly his fate? Shadow nudged Elliot's leg with his nose, breaking the man's trance. "You know something, don't you?" Elliot muttered, scratching the dog's ears. Shadow barked softly, his tail wagging. Elliot placed the items back in the box, except for the figurine, which he kept in his pocket. The answers lay ahead, and with Shadow as his guide, he was determined to uncover the truth. The coordinates etched into Shadow's collar led Elliot to an overgrown trail deep within Hidden Pines. The path was cloaked in shadows, the towering trees blocking out most of the sunlight. As Elliot ventured further, his unease grew. Shadow walked ahead with purpose, his nose low to the ground, as though he knew exactly where they were going. Elliot carried a backpack with essentials: water, a flashlight, a first aid kit, and the small wooden figurine he had found in the box. He kept glancing at it, the intricate carving of the boy and the dog a strange comfort amid the ominous forest. After nearly an hour of hiking, the trail narrowed, eventually opening into a clearing. In the center stood a crumbling stone wall, its edges covered in moss. The air here felt colder, heavier, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Shadow stopped abruptly, his ears perked and body tense. He let out a low growl, his amber eyes fixed on the wall. Elliot hesitated, scanning the clearing. "What is it, boy?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Shadow barked once, sharply, and took a step toward the well. Elliot followed, his boots crunching on the gravel. The closer he got, the more he noticed faint symbols carved into the stones, their meanings unclear but unnervingly deliberate. As he peered over the edge of the well, he saw nothing but darkness. Yet, there was something about it that made his skin crawl, an emptiness that felt alive. Elliot's focus shifted when Shadow began pawing at the ground near the well. Curious, Elliot knelt and started digging with his hands, the soil surprisingly loose. After a few minutes, his fingers brushed against something hard. Pulling it free, he uncovered an old, rusted tin box. Unlike the first one, this box had no lock. He opened it carefully, revealing its contents, a faded photograph of a woman and a young boy. The woman's face was unmistakably Maria, and the boy, Samuel. They were smiling, standing in front of what looked like the very same well. A small, hand-drawn map of the forest, with a red X marked near the clearing. Another note, this one written in the same hurried handwriting as the first: "If you've come this far, you've earned the truth. Shadow is your guide. Trust him. But be prepared, the past is darker than you think." Elliot's heart pounded as he folded the note and examined the map. The red X wasn't far from where he stood, just beyond the clearing. "Let's go," Elliot said, rising to his feet. Shadow wagged his tail and took the lead once again. They followed the map to another secluded area of the forest, where the remnants of a small, burned-down cabin lay hidden among the trees. The charred wood and overgrown vegetation gave the sight an eerie stillness. Elliot's stomach churned as he approached the ruins, the air thick with the scent of decay, though the fire must have happened years ago. Shadow sniffed the ground near the cabin's foundation, then barked twice, standing still by what looked like a half-buried trapdoor. Elliot knelt and brushed away the dirt and debris, revealing a wooden hatch with a rusted handle. Taking a deep breath, he pulled it open. The hinges groaned in protest, revealing a set of stairs leading into a dark, underground cellar. Elliot hesitated, gripping the flashlight tightly. Shadow stepped onto the stairs without hesitation, looking back at Elliot expectantly. "All right, boy," Elliot muttered. "Let's see where this takes us." The cellar was damp and cold, the air thick with a musty smell. The beam of Elliot's flashlight illuminated the narrow space, revealing shelves lined with jars and crates. But what caught his attention was the wall at the far end, where photographs, documents, and newspaper clippings were pinned in a chaotic collage. As Elliot approached, he felt a chill run down his spine. The photographs included images of Maria and Samuel, as well as other unidentified women and children. Notes were scrawled in the margins of the clippings: "Target acquired. Relocation necessary. Eliminate threats." At the center of the collage was a photograph of a man, tall, broad-shouldered, with piercing eyes and a cruel smirk. Beneath it was a single name: Victor Malone. Elliot recognized the name from the newspaper article he had found earlier. Victor was Maria's estranged husband, the man suspected of driving her and Samuel into hiding. The realization hit Elliot like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a story of a mother and son fleeing abuse. It was something far more sinister, organized, calculated, and deeply personal. Shadow whined softly, pressing against Elliot's leg. Elliot knelt, wrapping an arm around the dog. "We'll figure this out," he murmured, though the words felt hollow. Elliot took pictures of the wall with his phone, documenting every detail. As he stepped back, his flashlight caught something else, another small box tucked behind one of the shelves. He opened it to find a key and a note: "The safe holds the answers. You're close. Don't stop now." With Shadow by his side, Elliot knew he was unraveling a dangerous web of secrets. Each discovery brought him closer to the truth, but it also painted a picture of someone desperate enough to silence anyone who got in their way. Elliot stood frozen at the entrance to the stone vault, the words on the note weighing heavily in his mind: "If you're here, you're ready. Open it. But know that once you do, there's no going back." The grove felt impossibly quiet, as though the forest itself held its breath in anticipation. Shadow sat beside him, his calm, steady gaze fixed on the safe as if urging Elliot to take the next step. The safe, a steel box with intricate dials and an aged exterior, bore no outward markings of importance. Yet the sense of foreboding surrounding it was palpable. Elliot knelt, brushing away a layer of dust that had settled on its surface, revealing faint scratches on the metal. Were they accidental? Or deliberate? With the key in hand, Elliot took a deep breath and inserted it into the small lock on the safe. The mechanism resisted for a moment, then gave a soft, almost reluctant click. His fingers trembled as he turned the dials in the sequence provided on the note he had found earlier. The final click of the combination echoed loudly in the confined space. The lid creaked open, revealing the safe's contents: photographs. A stack of faded images sat atop the pile. The first showed Maria and Samuel, but beneath it were others that chilled Elliot to his core. Women and children, their faces filled with fear and exhaustion, stood in nondescript locations: warehouses, alleyways, and wooded areas. These weren't just random snapshots, they were records of lives interrupted, catalogued like inventory. A bundle of documents, Elliot pulled them out carefully. They were detailed reports, including dates, names, and transactions. It became horrifyingly clear: these papers chronicled the operations of a trafficking ring. At the bottom of each page was a name: Victor Malone. A tape recorder. The old device was still functional, a cassette tape already inserted and labeled in bold, black letters: confession. A sealed envelope. The words, "For Elliot," were scrawled across the front in Maria's handwriting. Elliot's pulse quickened as he opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, written in haste, the ink smudged in places: "Elliot, if you found this, it means Shadow led you here, as I knew he would. Victor is not just a man who ruined my life, he's a predator who destroyed countless others. Samuel and I tried to escape him, but his reach was vast. The trafficking ring he operates is sophisticated, and those who've tried to expose it before have disappeared. You were always the person I could trust, even if time and distance kept us apart. I hoped you'd never have to carry this burden, but I had no one else. Shadow is more than just a dog, he is a witness. He was there when Victor confronted us. His loyalty saved Samuel that night. Everything you need to bring Victor down is here. But this path is dangerous, Elliot. Once you begin, there's no turning back. I pray you'll forgive me for placing this on your shoulders." Maria ***. Elliot's grip on the letter tightened as he read Maria's words, his vision blurring with unshed tears. Shadow whined softly, nudging Elliot's hand with his nose, sensing his distress. "This is bigger than I thought," Elliot muttered, his voice thick with emotion. He turned his attention to the tape recorder. His fingers hovered over the play button for a moment before pressing it. The recording crackled to life, and Victor Malone's voice filled the vault, cold and smug. "People think they can escape me, but they can't. Maria thought she could hide Samuel, but I always find what's mine. And when I do, they pay. This is just business. It's all just business." The tape continued, detailing chilling confessions of Victor's crimes, bribes to officials, silencing witnesses, and using the trafficking ring to fund his empire. Elliot felt his stomach churn. This tape was a damning piece of evidence, but it was also a death warrant if it fell into the wrong hands. He knew the risks of confronting someone as powerful and ruthless as Victor. Shadow barked sharply, breaking Elliot's thoughts. The dog stood near the entrance of the vault, his ears perked and body tense. Elliot quickly packed the contents of the safe into his bag, extinguished the flashlight, and followed Shadow out of the vault. As they emerged into the grove, Elliot scanned the area. The forest was still, but the hair on the back of his neck stood on end. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were no longer alone. Shadow growled low, his gaze fixed on the tree line. Elliot's instincts kicked in, he needed to move, and fast. With Shadow leading the way, they made their way back toward the cabin ruins, the evidence now in Elliot's possession weighing heavily on him. Every step forward felt like a step deeper into a storm he wasn't sure he could weather. But one thing was certain, Maria's truth would not remain buried. Elliot's pulse pounded in his temples as he and Shadow moved swiftly through the dense forest, the weight of the evidence in his bag pressing against his side. The darkness of the night seemed to cling to the trees, amplifying the urgency of their journey back to the cabin ruins. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig, felt like an omen, a warning that something was amiss. Shadow's posture was tense, his nose constantly twitching as if he could sense the danger before Elliot could. The dog's growls were barely audible, but there was no mistaking the intensity of his alertness. Elliot couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He quickened his pace, his mind racing through the consequences of the information he had uncovered. The trafficking ring, Victor Malone's involvement, Maria's cryptic message, it was all starting to feel like a tangled web that Elliot wasn't sure he could untangle without falling into it. When they reached the clearing where the cabin ruins stood, the place felt different. The stillness was oppressive. It was as if the cabin itself was holding its breath, waiting. Elliot scanned the area, searching for any sign of movement, any indication that someone had been there. He motioned for Shadow to stay quiet, his eyes narrowing as he approached the collapsed structure. The remnants of the roof were partially covered by ivy, but the stone walls still stood, a silent testament to what had once been. The cabin, which had felt like a sanctuary only hours ago, now seemed like a trap, a place where the past had come alive in the most terrifying way. Elliot knelt beside the ruins and placed the bag carefully on the ground. Shadow stood alert nearby, his gaze fixed on the forest beyond. Elliot could feel the tension in the air, as if something was waiting for him to make the next move. It was then that he heard it, the crunch of footsteps on dry leaves. Elliot's heart skipped a beat. His hand instinctively reached for the pistol at his side, but his breath caught when he saw the silhouette emerging from the shadows. It was a figure he hadn't expected to see. "Victor," Elliot whispered under his breath. Victor Malone stepped into the clearing, his cold, calculating eyes locking onto Elliot. His face, always composed, now wore a slight smirk. There was no mistaking the satisfaction in his expression. He had known, somehow, that Elliot would come here. "I knew you'd be stupid enough to dig too deep," Victor said, his voice smooth, like honey, but laced with malice. "You're too much like her, you know. Always thinking you can save everyone, always thinking you can make a difference. But you're out of your depth, Elliot." Elliot's fingers tightened around the handle of the gun, but he didn't draw it. Instead, he stood tall, trying to mask the fear that crept up his spine. "What are you doing here, Victor? Did you follow me?" Victor chuckled darkly. "No. I was already here." His eyes flicked over to Shadow, who stood at Elliot's side, every muscle in his body taut. "I've been here for years, watching, waiting. You don't think I knew what you were up to, did you?" Elliot's mind raced. Victor had been watching him all along. The dog, the safe, the letter, it all made sense now. Victor had orchestrated this from the beginning, setting him up like a pawn in a game he didn't fully understand. Victor took a step forward, his expression growing more serious. "You've uncovered everything, haven't you? The trafficking, the lies, Maria's pathetic little attempt to run away with the boy. It was all too easy to pull the strings." He sneered, his words like poison. "You think you can stop me, Elliot? You think you can expose me? You're just like her, weak, sentimental. And now look where it's gotten you." Elliot's breath quickened as anger flared inside him. The man before him wasn't just a criminal, he was the embodiment of everything that was wrong in the world. The darkness that had stolen lives, manipulated people, and broken families. But Elliot wasn't going to back down. "I'm going to stop you, Victor," he said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside him. "I don't care what it takes. You won't get away with it." Victor's smirk faltered for just a moment before he straightened, his eyes narrowing. "You think it's that easy? You think you can bring me down with a few photographs and a tape recorder? You're in way over your head." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, black device. The sound of a gun being cocked echoed in the night air. Elliot's heart pounded in his chest as he recognized the device. It was a trigger, one that could activate something much worse than a mere gunshot. Victor had a plan, a backup plan in case things didn't go his way. Before Elliot could react, Shadow let out a sharp bark and lunged toward Victor, his powerful form knocking the man off balance. In the split second that followed, Elliot grabbed for his gun, but it was too late. The sound of an explosion ripped through the air, and the ground beneath them trembled. The blast sent Elliot sprawling backward, his body slamming against the rubble of the cabin. The world around him spun, the air thick with smoke and dust. He struggled to push himself up, coughing violently, his ears ringing. Through the haze, he could just make out the figure of Victor, now lying motionless on the ground, the device clutched in his hand. But Shadow was nowhere to be seen. Panic gripped Elliot as he scrambled toward the wreckage. "Shadow!" he shouted, his voice hoarse. Seconds stretched into eternity as Elliot searched through the debris. Finally, he spotted the familiar shape of the dog, lying motionless beneath a pile of stone. Blood was seeping from a wound on Shadow's side. Elliot's heart shattered as he crawled toward the dog, his hands trembling as he lifted him gently. "Stay with me, Shadow," Elliot whispered, his voice breaking. The dog's eyes flickered open, his tail giving a faint wag, as if reassuring Elliot that he wasn't gone yet. As Elliot cradled Shadow in his arms, he realized that the battle was far from over. But this was the moment he had been waiting for. The final piece of the puzzle was now in his hands, and nothing would stop him from taking down Victor once and for all. The minutes after the explosion felt like hours. The air was thick with smoke and the pungent scent of burning wood. Elliot cradled Shadow in his arms, his body aching from the blast. His heart pounded as he checked the dog's condition, praying that his loyal companion would pull through. "Come on, buddy," Elliot whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Stay with me." The soft whine from Shadow was the only sign that the dog was still conscious. His once vibrant eyes were dim, but they locked onto Elliot's with a trust that spoke volumes. Shadow had been there for him through everything, now it was Elliot's turn to be there for him. As Elliot gently patted Shadow's head, the sound of footsteps broke through the haze. His heart skipped a beat. Could Victor have survived the blast? Was there another threat lurking nearby? Through the smoke, a figure emerged, and Elliot's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't Victor, it was a woman, moving with a determined grace. Her features were partially obscured by the smoke, but Elliot immediately recognized her. "Maria," he whispered in disbelief. She nodded, her face grim, her clothes covered in dust from the explosion. "I knew you'd come for him," she said, her voice laced with emotion. "I knew you'd find the truth." Elliot stared at her, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. Maria had been missing for years, presumed dead or lost to the shadows of Victor's empire. Yet here she was, standing in front of him, as if nothing had changed. "Maria, how?" Elliot began, but his voice faltered as the weight of the situation pressed down on him. Maria's eyes softened as she knelt beside him, carefully examining Shadow's wound. "We don't have much time," she said urgently. "Victor has a backup plan. He'll be here soon, and when he comes, we need to be ready." Elliot looked down at the dog, who was now lying still in his arms, his breathing shallow. "What happened? How are you here?" Maria's face darkened as she looked back toward the remains of the cabin. "Victor thought he had me. But he didn't know about the others. There are more people, Elliot, people who want him gone. People who have been fighting back against him for years. They've been watching, waiting for the right moment." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. "I've been working with them, gathering evidence, trying to expose Victor's network. But it's dangerous. So dangerous." Maria handed the paper to Elliot, and he unfolded it carefully. It was a list of names, names of officials, criminals, and allies that Victor had in his pocket. But there was something more chilling at the bottom: Victor's final plan, the auction. Elliot's stomach dropped. The words on the paper confirmed his worst fears. Victor's selling people. He's still, Maria nodded. Yes. He's planning one last, massive auction. It's his way of finalizing his empire, getting rid of anyone who might expose him. He's not just in the business of trafficking people, he's turning it into a twisted auction, where those who can pay the highest price get what they want. It's the ultimate betrayal. Elliot's anger surged at the thought of what Victor was doing, but the thought of stopping him seemed impossible. The people on that list, some of them were powerful, too powerful for anyone to stand against. How could he, a man with no resources but a broken past, possibly fight something this immense? "We need to stop the auction," Maria said, as though reading his thoughts. "And we need to do it before it happens." Elliot's mind raced as he looked at Shadow, who was still barely holding on. But the dog's quiet whimper brought him back to reality. He couldn't wait. He couldn't back down now. "We'll stop it together," Elliot said, determination in his eyes. "But I need to know everything you know." "All of it." Maria nodded. She glanced around the ruined clearing, her expression hardening. "We need to get to the warehouse where the auction is taking place. It's heavily guarded, but I have a plan." She moved closer to Elliot, speaking in hushed tones. "We can't fight this with brute force. We need leverage. We need to expose Victor's allies first, cut off his support. If we can disrupt the auction, we can dismantle his entire operation." Elliot glanced at the list again. He recognized a few of the names: high-ranking officials, powerful people who had their own secrets to protect. If they were exposed, they would fight to keep Victor's empire intact. But that was exactly what Maria and Elliot needed. "Where do we start?" Elliot asked, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his gut. Maria pointed to a spot on the list. "This man," she said, her finger hovering over the name, Jonathan Hargrave. "He's a senator who has been secretly funding Victor's operations for years. If we can get him to back down, the rest will follow." Before Elliot could respond, a faint sound cut through the tension in the air. A car engine. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as he looked around the clearing. There was no mistaking it. Someone was coming. "Victor's men," Maria said, her eyes wide with alarm. "They've tracked us here. We don't have much time." Elliot stood up quickly, scanning the area for a way out. "We'll head toward the old mine shaft. It's the safest route. It'll take us to the back of the town, where we can catch our breath and regroup." With Shadow in his arms and Maria at his side, Elliot began to move, his mind racing. The fight wasn't over, it had only just begun. And this time, he wouldn't stop until Victor Malone was brought to justice, no matter what the cost. With Shadow's guidance, Elliot discovered a final clue: Samuel was alive and living under an assumed name in another state, taken in by a family friend. He had been shielded from his past for his safety. Elliot arranged a meeting. When Shadow saw Samuel, now a young man, the dog's joy was unmistakable. Samuel broke down, finally learning the full story of his mother's sacrifice. Elliot realized that Shadow had brought them all together to heal, and in doing so, helped Elliot confront his own grief.